What's going on, my friends? I've got another single topic video for you guys today. Before we get into that, you guys are going to have to pardon a little bit of shameless self-promotion. I promise I'll keep it quick. If you enjoy the lifting related content that I put out on YouTube, I would encourage you to potentially check out my Patreon for only $5 a month. You have access to the bench program I wrote, any future programs I will write. I have a deadlift program that I'm slowly chipping away on. And the other thing that I am doing on there that people might think is interesting is, rather than, as I do on the YouTube channel, when someone asks me a question, giving a brief comment reply and or a 1-minute segment in my Q&A videos, I am trying out doing a full kind of article style write-up for the more intricate questions asked me on there, and you'll have access to all of those. I figured it was a good opportunity for me to work on my writing skills and take a little bit more of a deep dive on the questions on there. I've always enjoyed a well-written lifting article, though they seem to be few and far between. So I decided I would try to make some for myself. So if that's something that interests you, you can check out the link in the description. Now, moving on to the topic. This is another one that I got from the poll or the community post that Mr. Bald Omni-Man put up, asking his viewers what they wanted to see, which ones had the biggest positive receptions. And one question in particular was, what is the utility of strongman carries in terms of hypertrophy, in terms of strength? And I'm going to tack on in terms of conditioning. He said, okay, other than farmer's carries, because we all kind of know about those, yoke carries, sandbag carries, potentially stone carries, Husafel stone simulator carries. Where are we coming at these things from a strength, a hypertrophy, and a conditioning perspective? How do we rank them? And I'm going to include the farmer's carries in there anyway, just because I think it's useful. So first, we're going to come at these couple of motions from a hypertrophy perspective. Honestly, they're not exactly the cream of the crop in terms of a hypertrophy perspective. There's way too many things in these motions that could be a limiting factor other than just contractile property of the muscle, which is ideally we have a target muscle or muscles that we are training, and the proximity to failure is going to be determined by the capacity of these muscles in particular. We can push adequate volumes for these muscles on a week-to-week basis, push up towards our MRV, and maximally hypertrophy these muscles. These motions do not necessarily fit that bill all that well, especially given that the more recent literature, we've kind of moved away from this time under tension model of hypertrophy. Realize that work performed, range of motion, these things are probably a bit more important than purely the time under tension, in which case something that largely is involving isometric contractions of our muscles might not be the best thing in the world from a hypertrophy perspective. That being said, just because something is not optimal doesn't mean it doesn't work. If you are going and you're putting in, your work as far as you're eating, you're sleeping, you're eating probably about your body weight in grams of protein, and then you're going and you're busting your ass on some sandbag carries in your backyard, you are going to see some pretty appreciable hypertrophy in your biceps, in your upper back, maybe potentially a little in your legs, if your legs are an aspect that's a little undertrained, I would say. So just because something is not optimal does not mean it doesn't work, right? If you religiously hammer away on heavy farmer's carries every week, you will see a big increase in development to your traps. That being said, it's probably not quite the same as if we were doing dedicated trap hypertrophy training, such as shrugs, even using the same implement. So that would be my breakdown of these motions from a hypertrophy perspective. You're going to get some hypertrophic response, but if that's our primary goal, these probably aren't best for you. Next, we're going to look at these from a conditioning perspective, and this is a bit of a mixed bag. The reason that I'm hesitant to do loaded conditioning work, which is something that's become popular over the last couple of years, people really advocate for cardio under load or HIIT under load as a form of conditioning that's also going to aid you in your lifting. I don't necessarily always agree with it, but there's an old West Side adage that I think kind of relates to this, and the adage is you don't lift weights to get in shape, you get in shape to lift weights. And my understanding of the principle, or at least how I apply this quote, is to say that if we are pushing the pace or pushing our work capacity to such a degree with our weight training that it's going to be driving conditioning, chances are we're not going to be able to focus on our form as much as we probably should. Instead, we build up a level of conditioning that lets us handle our full weight training regimen without conditioning ever being the limiting factor. If you don't need to do any conditioning work to reach that point, awesome. You don't necessarily need to do any conditioning work. But if we're using the weight training to really push our work capacity, we're going to be operating under a level of fatigue that probably our cues are going to go out the window. And how does this relate to what we were talking about? Specifically, I would probably advocate for not using the yoke as a conditioning tool. I know lots of, especially powerlifters, have really romanticized the idea of using strongman training as loaded conditioning, and I would at the very least urge you away from using the yoke. The yoke is, generally speaking, going to be a very heavy load if we're working remotely hard, most often more than you can squat, even for pretty sizable distances. Placed directly on your spine, so it's a heavy axially loaded motion, and doing this under a very high level of cardiovascular fatigue, where our cues are going out the window, our motor patterns are going out the window, is probably something that I would stay away from. I know enough people who have kind of casually used the yoke as an adjunct to their training and hurt themselves doing so, that I would tell you guys that it's something just to be aware of. The yoke in particular, I do think that you can use sandbag carries, potentially Husafel or stone carries as a conditioning tool, like a loaded conditioning tool. I think that the risk for injury is probably pretty minimal there, unless you're doing something pretty stupid. But I did want to warn you guys that no, I don't think the yoke is a great conditioning tool. I don't think farmer's carries are not the greatest conditioning tool, because you're more often going to be limited by your grip than specifically your work capacity. But again, just because something is not optimal does not mean it's not effective. And if you enjoy doing some loaded conditioning using farmers, go for it. And then I think the sandbag carries, especially the protocol that I stole from Luke Richardson's coach that I really like, is jog one way, sprint the other, carry the bag back, right? So we have a length, we're gonna jog down, sprint back, carry. Jog down, sprint back, carry, with no rest times, obviously using a fairly submaximal load. That will prepare you, if you are interested in competitive strongman, you're going to do quite well in your loading and carrying events if this is something that you partake in weekly in your training. And it'll also just get you in really solid shape, because it is damn hard. So that would be my breakdown upon their use, or about their use as conditioning tools. And then the last one is their use as strength tools, in which case they're awesome. They are absolutely very good motions. I think that if we are a powerlifter in the off season, we're looking to vary our loading protocols. Training these motions can be extremely useful. If we're just someone who's interested in general strength training, just as much as a squat is whatever we want to call a basic human function, an overhead press is a basic human function, a deadlift is a basic human function. Well, if we're going off of that rationale, which I think can sometimes be a little bit of a fallacy, but if that's something you buy into, walking with weight is absolutely about as human a function as you can get. So strengthening that function can be quite good, right? We're going to develop grip strength in great quantities with farmer's carries. It's one of the best grip exercises I could possibly advocate for. We're going to develop great strength through our upper back, great strength in our hips and our core from stabilizing these loads. Kind of the same thing with the yoke. The hip and core strength that will build is going to be 10 times the stimulus that any front and side plank combo is going to be. So if you're someone who thinks, oh yeah, I do front and side planks because they aid my squat, well, there's a good chance that at least getting decent, or at least, we're going to get to a point of diminishing returns eventually, but improving on the yoke, we will see even more improvement. And then the same thing with sandbag carries. I think those are just really hard and just build a lot of good general strength, right? People will talk about whether a motion is functional or not functional. It's a buzzword. Nobody's defining it. And yes, it is. It's a junk term, right? But the general gist of what people mean when they're saying, whether something's functional is how much transference a given motion is going to have to feats of strength within your day-to-day life. And I will tell you that nothing gets you ready for getting something heavy from lows like doing excessively heavy sandbag carries. I can squat, 700 and some odd pounds, right? And when I go to carry gravel out of the lot at Lowe's or Home Depot, it feels pretty heavy. But if I've been training my sandbag carries, damn, am I ready for that? If I need to go help the UPS man carry in a package, if I've been doing my sandbag carries, feels pretty easy. And it builds a level of preparedness for kind of day-to-day tasks that I think is kind of unique. and I will always advocate for sandbag carries as just a general strength motion. They suck, and because they suck, they work very well. It's kind of how I feel about front squats. So that would be my rundown. Should have had my caffeine before this. A little bit of more stuttering than I would like, but let me know what videos you guys would like to see. I might do a second one today because I wasn't entirely pleased with the quality of this one. Thank you for watching.